The Shadow of the Sun, America's most audacious forgery and the battle for the West. It began with a whisper, then a roar, and finally a secret that would shake the very foundations of American ambition. Imagine, if you will, a time when the vast, untamed American West was not just a land of opportunity, but a canvas for the most audacious con in U.S. history. This isn't just a tale of gold rushes and cowboys. It's about a document, seemingly unremarkable, that nearly redrew the map of a nation and made a handful of men unimaginably rich, all while leaving a trail of intrigue, murder, and political scandal in its wake. Forget everything you think you know about how America acquired its southwestern territories. The truth is far stranger, more perilous, and infinitely more human. At its heart lies a forgotten hero, a legal genius whose life was a testament to quiet perseverance, and a shadowy cabal of powerful figures willing to commit the ultimate deception for land, power, and the glittering promise of California. Our story truly begins not in the dusty plains, but in the hushed intellectual corridors of Washington, D.C., and the smoky backrooms of Denver, Colorado in the late 19th century. The year is 1883. The West is still wild, but rapidly being carved up, surveyed, and claimed. The railroads are pushing through, connecting east to west, and with them come legions of prospectors, settlers, and speculators. Land, once seemingly infinite, is now the ultimate prize. But there was a problem, or rather, a vast, tantalizing opportunity, depending on your perspective. The United States had acquired immense territories from Mexico after the Mexican-American War and the Gadsden Purchase. These lands, particularly in New Mexico, Arizona, and California, were rich in minerals, agricultural potential, and strategic value. However, much of this land was still subject to ancient Spanish and Mexican land grants, vast tracts given to individuals and communities centuries ago by kings and viceroys. These grants were protected by U.S. treaties, and they were a nightmare for developers and railroad companies who wanted clear title to lay tracks, dig lines, and sell plots. Proving or disproving these grants was a complex, expensive, and often corrupt process. Enter our unlikely protagonist, a man named Frank Bond. Not a dashing adventurer or a ruthless baron, but a meticulous, unassuming clerk in the U.S. Surveyor General's office in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Bond was a quiet man, with spectacles perched on his nose, and an encyclopedic knowledge of Spanish colonial law and archaic handwriting. He was one of the few who could decipher the faded, elaborate script of centuries-old documents, distinguishing genuine seals from crude forgeries. He believed in the law, in justice, and the painstaking truth. He was, in short, the perfect target. One sweltering summer afternoon, a man walked into Bond's office. He wasn't flashy or aggressive. Instead, he carried himself with an air of sophisticated confidence, an almost aristocratic bearing. This was James Addison Reavis. Reavis was, in his own mind, a king in waiting. He was a brilliant, charismatic, and utterly amoral con artist, a master of disguise and deception, who had honed his craft through years of minor swindles and a stint as a Confederate spy during the Civil War. But his vision was far grander than mere petty theft. Reavis saw the land grants not as obstacles, but as the keys to unimaginable wealth and power. He had conceived a scheme so breathtaking in its scope, so intricate in its execution, that it would beggar belief. He planned to forge an entire lineage, a royal decree, and hundreds of historical documents to lay claim to a parcel of land roughly the size of Massachusetts, stretching across prime areas of Arizona and New Mexico, including lucrative mining districts and the burgeoning city of Phoenix. He called it, grandly, the Peralta Grant. Reavis approached Bond under the guise of an earnest historian, seeking assistance in researching an old Spanish land claim. He flattered Bond, praised his expertise, and subtly planted the seeds of his grand deception. He spoke of a long-lost Spanish baron, Don Miguel de Peralta de la Cornala, to whom the King of Spain had supposedly granted vast lands in the New World in the 17th century, lands that, Reavis insinuated, were now due to Peralta's last living heir. Bond, ever the scholar, was intrigued. He had never encountered a Peralta grant of such magnitude in his extensive studies, but Reavis was persuasive, offering carefully crafted, seemingly authentic reproductions of documents, subtly aged paper, meticulously copied script, and plausible, if obscure, historical references. He claimed these were fragments he had painstakingly discovered in dusty archives across Mexico and Spain. What Bond didn't know was that Reavis had spent years, almost a decade, perfecting his masterpiece. He had traveled to Spain and Mexico, not merely researching, but creating history. He had bribed archivists, infiltrated ancient monasteries, and learned the art of forgery from master craftsmen. He had even, horrifyingly, created a fictitious heir, a young woman he'd discovered in an orphanage in California, whom he later married, thus cementing his claim. Her name was Sofia Loretta Micaela Masso y Peralta. To the world, she was the last descendant of Baron Peralta. To Reavis, she was a crucial pawn in his game. Reavis's plan was to introduce these forged documents, one by one, into the official U.S. land records, slowly building a mountain of seemingly irrefutable evidence. He understood that a single audacious lie could easily be detected, but 1,000 small, plausible lies woven into the fabric of history itself could become an undeniable truth. He was not just forging documents, he was forging an entire historical narrative, with noble ancestors, royal decrees, and centuries of tradition. The Peralta grant encompassed 12 million acres, an area larger than many European countries. If successful, Reavis would be one of the richest men in the world, holding sway over entire cities, mines, and transportation routes. He would own the very land beneath the feet of thousands of unsuspecting American settlers. But how could one man, armed only with a magnifying glass and a deep respect for truth, stand against a brilliant deceiver who had spent years weaving an elaborate tapestry of lies, a man who had already begun to charm senators, judges, and even the president himself? The shadow of the sun, as the Peralta lands were sometimes called, was about to cast a long, dark pall over the American West, and Frank Bond, the quiet clerk, was about to find himself in the fight of his life, a battle not just for land, but for history itself. The initial tremors of Reavis's scheme began to ripple through the legal and political landscape of the West. He didn't rush, he moved with the patience of a spider weaving its web. His first step was always to register a notice of claim with the U.S. Surveyor General's office. This was a critical procedural step. Once a claim was noticed, it would trigger a process of investigation and verification. Reavis knew this process was slow, underfunded, and often staffed by individuals less meticulous than Frank Bond. His first discovery of Peralta-related documents involved a purported will of Don Miguel de Peralta, dated 1782,
found, so Reavis claimed, in a dusty chest in a remote Mexican village. This document, innocent on its own, merely established the existence of a Peralta and hinted at extensive properties. It was a foundation stone, seemingly innocuous, but crucial for the edifice of deceit he was constructing.
Armed with this evidence, Bond returned to the United States. He presented his findings to the U.S. Attorney, who was initially skeptical. How could one man manage such a feat? But Bond laid out his case methodically, presenting photographic evidence of the inserted pages, expert testimony on the anachronistic paper and ink, and a detailed analysis of Reavis's distinctive hand. He even brought a witness, a disgruntled former employee of Reavis who had been privy to some of the less savory aspects of his operation. The tide began to turn. The U.S. Attorney General assigned a special prosecutor to the case, a formidable legal mind named Matthew G. Reynolds. Reynolds was known for his tenacity and his unwavering commitment to justice. He quickly realized the enormity of the deception they were facing. The trial of James Addison Reavis for fraud against the United States government became a sensation. It wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was a national drama. Newspapers across the country breathlessly reported every development. Could a single man really have orchestrated such a vast and intricate forgery? Was the Baroness Sophia an innocent pawn or a willing accomplice? Reavis, ever the showman, faced the charges with defiant calm. He maintained his innocence, portraying himself as a victim of a government conspiracy, a man simply trying to restore his wife's rightful inheritance. He brought in his own experts to testify to the authenticity of his documents, presenting a powerful counter-narrative that confused and captivated the public. He was eloquent, charismatic, and persuasive, even under intense cross-examination. But Frank Bond and Matthew Reynolds had a trump card, the physical evidence from the Spanish and Mexican archives. They brought in international experts on paleography and historical documents who unequivocally testified that the Peralta documents were forgeries, meticulously explaining the subtle anachronisms in paper, ink, language, and calligraphy style. They showed how genuine archival volumes had been tampered with, forged pages carefully inserted. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source: the actual authenticated birth records of Sofia Loretta Micaela Masso, discovered in an orphanage in San Francisco. She was not a Spanish baroness, but the daughter of impoverished American parents, abandoned at birth. Reavis had plucked her from obscurity, groomed her, and married her purely to legitimize his fraudulent claim. Sophia, now realizing the full extent of Reavis's deception, broke down on the stand, revealing the tragic truth of her manipulated identity. The jury was stunned. The Baroness was a fraud, her claim to nobility a cruel invention. The documents, meticulously crafted, were revealed as an elaborate lie. The myth of the Peralta grant, carefully constructed over years, crumbled under the weight of irrefutable evidence. On June 25, 1896, after a lengthy and sensational trial, James Addison Reavis was found guilty on multiple counts of land fraud. He was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison and fined a staggering $11,000, a colossal sum at the time. The Peralta grant, which had threatened to engulf millions of acres of the American West, was declared null and void. The settlers whose lands had been imperiled could breathe a sigh of relief. Frank Bond, the quiet clerk, emerged as a national hero. His meticulous work, his dedication to truth, and his perilous journey had saved countless families from financial ruin and protected the integrity of America's westward expansion. He returned to his quiet life, content with the knowledge that he had done his duty.
But the story of the Peralta grant is more than just a tale of audacious forgery and legal triumph. It is a profound exploration of ambition, deception, and the fragile nature of historical truth. It highlights the vulnerability of nascent nations to clever con artists and the crucial role of diligent, often unsung public servants. It serves as a vivid reminder that history itself can be manipulated and that vigilance is always necessary to distinguish genuine narratives from meticulously crafted fictions. The legacy of James Addison Reavis, the Baron of Arizona, lingers to this day. His story is a testament to the fact that sometimes the most astonishing truths are stranger than any fiction, and that the shadows cast by the sun can sometimes hide the most audacious deceptions in plain sight. The saga of the Peralta grant serves as a powerful cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the enduring importance of historical integrity. It reminds us that behind every grand narrative of national expansion and territorial acquisition, there are countless individual stories, many of them shaped by unseen battles for truth and justice. The American West, often romanticized as a place of clear-cut heroes and villains, was in reality a complex tapestry woven with threads of aspiration, greed, and the tireless pursuit of factual accuracy. Even after Reavis's conviction, the reverberations of his fraud continued for years. The legal system had to painstakingly untangle the hundreds of smaller claims and transactions that had been initiated under the false premise of the Peralta grant. Many individuals who had unwittingly bought Peralta lands from Reavis or his associates faced financial losses, although the government tried to mitigate these where possible. The land titles in parts of Arizona and New Mexico had been so thoroughly muddled by Reavis's fabrications that it took decades to fully clarify them, a testament to the depth of his deception. Frank Bond, despite his heroism, never sought public adulation. He remained in his position in the Surveyor General's office, diligently continuing his work. His story, while celebrated in legal and historical circles, never quite captured the public imagination in the same way as the sensationalized exploits of outlaws or legendary lawmen. Perhaps it was because his victory was one of intellect and painstaking detail, rather than gunfights and dramatic chases. Yet his contribution to the stability of the American West was arguably far greater. He was the quiet sentinel guarding the truth, a vital if unglamorous pillar of the developing nation. The tale also sheds light on the often overlooked bureaucratic heroes of American history. We tend to focus on presidents, generals, and industrialists, but it was often the dedicated clerks, archivists, and minor officials who, through their adherence to protocol and their deep knowledge, prevented massive frauds and safeguarded public resources. Bond's story is a powerful reminder that democracy and justice often rely on the diligent, everyday work of ordinary people committed to their duties. Moreover, the Peralta grant exposed vulnerabilities in the young American legal and administrative systems. The vastness of the acquired territories, the complexity of Spanish and Mexican land laws, and the sheer volume of land claims meant that the system was ripe for exploitation by someone as cunning as Reavis. It prompted significant reforms in how historical land grants were verified and processed, leading to more rigorous archival research and legal scrutiny. The impact on Sophia, Reavis's baroness, was profound and tragic. She was an unwitting pawn, a young woman whose identity had been stolen and repurposed for a grand deception. After the trial, she largely disappeared from public life, her true fate shrouded in obscurity. She was a poignant footnote, a reminder of the human cost of Reavis's boundless ambition and lack of conscience. She was a victim of circumstances, caught in a web of lies not her own making, her innocence shattered by the man who promised her a kingdom. The myth of the Peralta grant, however, continued to exert a strange hold on the imagination. For years, adventurers and treasure seekers would occasionally surface with new proof of the grant's existence, or tales of hidden Peralta gold. The story became intertwined with the lore of the lost Dutchman's gold mine in Arizona's Superstition Mountains, a place where many believed the Peralta family had hidden vast riches. These lingering myths are a testament to Reavis's skill as a storyteller, a forger not just of documents, but of enduring legends. The true significance of Reavis's fraud isn't just about land or money. It's about the very nature of history and how it can be weaponized. He didn't just forge papers, he attempted to rewrite history, to insert a fictional past into the collective memory of a nation. He understood that whoever controls the narrative of the past often controls the present and the future. His ambition was to claim not just land, but historical.
Reavis understood the psychology of evidence. He knew that forgeries often failed because they tried to prove too much too soon. His approach was gradual, each document building on the last, reinforcing a meticulously constructed narrative. He even began to publish articles in obscure historical journals, hinting at the vastness of the Peralta domain, preemptively setting the stage for his eventual grand reveal. Meanwhile, in Santa Fe, Frank Bond was growing increasingly troubled. The volume of historical documents Reavis presented for his research was staggering. Bond would spend his evenings poring over them, comparing script, analyzing watermarks, cross-referencing names and dates with established historical records. He found small inconsistencies, minor anomalies that most would dismiss. A phrase that seemed too modern for an 18th-century document. A sealing wax that didn't quite match government standards of the era. Individually, they were negligible. Collectively, they began to paint a disturbing picture. One evening, while examining a supposed royal decree from King Philip II of Spain granting the Peralta lands, Bond noticed something peculiar. The ornate, florid Spanish script was exquisitely done, almost perfect, but a specific calligraphic flourish, a way a particular letter G was formed, seemed strangely familiar. He had seen it before, not in 16th-century Spanish documents, but in a very different context. A legal brief from a minor Colorado land dispute he had worked on years ago, penned by a clerk known for his beautiful hand, a clerk who had, strangely, disappeared shortly after that case. Bond felt a chill. The pieces weren't just not fitting. They were being forced into place by an invisible hand. He began to investigate Reavis himself, discreetly at first. He learned that Reavis had arrived in the Southwest a few years prior, seemingly out of nowhere, with a ready supply of cash and an air of mystery. He had made powerful friends quickly, especially among land speculators and railroad magnates who had a vested interest in clearing up land titles in the region. Reavis had a knack for charming everyone from rough-and-tumble cowboys to dignified senators. He presented himself as a scholar, an explorer, a man of letters. He spoke with conviction about the historical injustices suffered by the Peralta family, evoking sympathy and a sense of moral obligation to restore their rightful inheritance. He even managed to secure an audience with influential figures in Washington, D.C., including some members of Congress who were swayed by his eloquent arguments and seemingly irrefutable documentation. The political machinery of the U.S. government, ever eager to see the West developed, was slowly being brought to bear on behalf of this audacious claim. The pressure on Bond intensified. His superiors in the Surveyor General's office, some of whom had been subtly influenced by Reavis or his powerful allies, urged him to expedite the Peralta claim. They saw it as a straightforward matter of historical justice, an opportunity to finally settle a long-standing claim and free up vast tracts of land for development. But Bond knew that straightforward was often the euphemism for unexamined. He continued his clandestine investigation, sacrificing his personal life, spending countless nights poring over documents, both genuine and suspect. He began corresponding secretly with Spanish and Mexican historians, subtly asking about any records of a vast Peralta grant. Their responses were consistently bewildered. No such grant of that magnitude existed in their archives. This confirmed Bond's worst fears. Reavis was not merely interpreting history, he was inventing it. The climax of Reavis's theatrical performance came with the grand introduction of Sofia Loretta Micaela Masso y Peralta. Reavis presented her as the last direct descendant of the Peralta line, a young woman of exquisite beauty and noble bearing, though with a somewhat vague personal history. He had found her, he claimed, in a remote Mexican village, living in impoverished obscurity, unaware of her royal heritage. He married her in a lavish ceremony that drew considerable attention, especially from newspapers eager for a romantic, rags-to-riches story from the Wild West. Her appearance added a powerful emotional dimension to Reavis's claim. Who could deny the inheritance of this innocent, aristocratic young woman? Her very presence became a living, breathing piece of his forgery, making the abstract legal documents feel tangible and real. With his Baroness by his side, Reavis's credibility soared. The legal battle was now inevitable. The U.S. government, represented by the Public Land Commission and eventually the Court of Private Land Claims, had to rule on the validity of the Peralta grant. Millions of acres, hundreds of thousands of settlers, and potentially billions of dollars were at stake. The fight would pit the meticulous legal analysis of a dedicated few against the overwhelming tide of public opinion, political pressure, and the brilliant, insidious deception of James Reavis. Reavis, now styling himself Barón de Peralta, began to collect rents and taxes from settlers on the alleged Peralta lands. He demanded payment from railroad companies whose tracks crossed his domain. He even tried to levy fees on mining operations. Many, fearing costly legal battles and believing his claim to be legitimate given the official attention it was receiving, paid up. Others, more defiant, refused, leading to escalating tensions and even violence in some areas. The West was not just wild, it was boiling with simmering resentment and fear, all fueled by a lie. Frank Bond knew he had to act. He understood that simply pointing out minor inconsistencies wouldn't be enough. He needed irrefutable proof, something that would tear down Reavis's entire fabricated narrative. He needed to go to the source. He requested a leave of absence, citing personal matters, and began to plan a journey that would take him thousands of miles deep into the historical archives of Spain and Mexico, the very places Reavis claimed to have sourced his evidence. It was a perilous, lonely quest, but Bond felt it was his duty. He was not just a clerk. He was a guardian of historical truth, and the future of the American West depended on him. His journey was arduous. In Madrid, he navigated ancient labyrinthine archives, poring over brittle parchment and dusty ledgers. He cross-referenced every name, every date, every obscure reference Reavis had ever mentioned. He found no mention of a vast Peralta grant. He found no extensive lineage for Don Miguel Peralta in the way Reavis described. What he did find were fragmented, minor grants to various Peralta families, but nothing approaching the scale or scope of Reavis's claim. Then he traveled to Mexico City, where he delved into the colonial archives, some of which had been poorly maintained since the tumultuous wars of independence. Here, too, he found nothing. But then, a stroke of luck, or perhaps providence. While examining a collection of documents related to land disputes in New Spain, he came across a specific volume that had recently been rebound. The new binding was unremarkable, but as he flipped through the pages, he noticed something odd. A few pages, near the middle of the volume, contained highly ornate, meticulously drawn maps. These maps depicted various small land grants, but on the margin of one, scrawled in a hasty, almost careless hand, was a symbol, a small, almost imperceptible R. It was a small detail, easily missed, but to Bond it was a thunderclap. He remembered the precise, almost artistic R Reavis used to sign Mino correspondence, a distinctive flourish that he had seen in the Colorado land dispute papers. And then he remembered the peculiar calligraphic G from the Spanish decree. He held his breath. This was it. Reavis hadn't just copied historical documents. He had inserted forged pages into existing, genuine volumes in the archives. He had bribed or manipulated archivists to allow him access, then cunningly slipped his fabrications into the historical record, ensuring they would appear discovered years later. The R was a careless, arrogant signature, a telltale mark left by the artist forger.